A clinical psychologist believes South Africa has to address multi-layered trauma if it hopes to effectively tackle the shocking crime statistics in the country. Nomfundo Mogapi, who's also the founder of the Center for Mental Wellness and Leadership and its CEO, argues that trauma is embedded in our personal and collective psyche. Is our society suffering from collective trauma? Let's try and find some answers from her, and she joins us virtually here in Johannesburg. Nomfundo, we had planned to focus on this collective trauma, but I can't have this conversation with you without pointing to a story we've been following quite closely this week and indeed this morning. The brutal rape and murder of a 17-year-old in Shoshanguve who was on her way home from extra classes at school. Palesa Malachi is no more. Her family and community laying them to rest today. We again have the police minister on the scene saying the things that we've heard him say before. But I'm worried about South Africans watching this news day in and day out. I know you've got 2 young daughters. I have a 2-year-old daughter who now starts talking about things that make her feel afraid, that kind of thing. How in households where the mum is not a psychologist like you are, a psychiatrist like you are, navigate dealing with this kind of story day in and day out as we let our girls out to go to school or to a shopping center or to go out to a restaurant without putting the fear of God into them?
Yeah, Masa, I think unfortunately we are a society that is used to underestimating the power and of what happens to us and how it impacts us as people and how we show up. And I think it's really important that as a society, we have a paradigm shift where we understand that doing our inner work, whether we are parents, we are leaders, as long as you are in, or even a police minister, that we are able to ourselves do the inner work that enables us, first of all, to create a container for the pain that will be presented by the people that we have to take care of, whether it's our children or it is the society at large in the case of the minister or the people that we actually lead. So our own capacity to contain the frustration of our children depends on our capacity as those that are in positions of influence to create the space for our own pain. And I think, Marcel, the crisis of our society, and that's why I am doing this work, is that we are asleep to how traumatized we are, and we don't deal with that trauma. And we just have a tendency to think that the inner work is a luxury. It is just for a few people that are so disturbed that they need to go to mental hospitals. And this completely contradicts what we are learning as the people that are working in the trauma field and what we are learning about neuropsychology, that the kinds of things that our society is going through, ranging from a child who is being molested, someone who's being raped, to being exposed to hijacking, to load shedding, to just even hearing this. What we are learning is that these things have a profound impact on how we function, on the functioning of our brain, on our relationship with our work, our relationship at home, and our relationship with each other. So as a society, I think the awakening and the important thing that we have to understand is that one of our greatest work is to do the internal work.
I heard a shocking statistic or a number this week as we head into Child Protection Week that we've got 15 adolescent and child specialist psychiatrists working in the public sector in South Africa. Now that tells you that we're dealing with a set of authorities whose faith we've put our faith in them to take care of our most vulnerable, who really hasn't put the importance of our mental health as important, and that we are on our own as communities at grassroots level, and that we have to be our own eyes and ears to look out for not just young people who perhaps are in peril, but also adults that are perhaps struggling but don't have the means to know what they're dealing with or where to find help.
Yeah, it's highly concerning, Marcel. I think 2 things I want to touch. The first one is that from the work that we do, we know that adverse childhood experiences, we call it ACE, there's been so much work done on ACEs, showing that if children are not given an opportunity to address the kinds of traumas that our children are exposed to, that affects the adult that they actually become. And some of us, we are the way that we are and struggling with the levels of anxiety, depression, irritable at workplace, creating toxic organizations because we also never dealt with our own trauma as children. So the work of investing in the mental health of children in our society, if we want to have a successful South Africa, is of paramount. I think the second thing, Marcel, that we are learning, and that's why most of my work is on what I call trauma-informed approaches, because we're beginning to say that in the trauma fault, that this work of transforming our trauma so that we become effective as a society can no longer just only be in the hand of specialists and mental health people. It has to be integrated in the very fabric of our society. It has to be integrated in how we lead our homes, how we interact with each other. So there's a big conscientization and just awakening drive that needs to be done in our society to say, this is how trauma affects us. This is how you can integrate this work in your own organization. This is how in early childhood development, you cannot do early childhood development and bring in teachers that are themselves too broken to can hold these children and not ensure that there's mental health people to assist our children to deal with that trauma. I'm telling you now, Marcel, a whole generation is being wiped out mentally in our society, because these are going to be the adults that will end up committing the very crimes and problems that we're complaining about. Show me the adult of tomorrow, and I'll show you the child of today and their own mental health.
And this really is where we could break that unending chain of intergenerational trauma. I mean, I listened quite thoughtfully to your conversation with my industry colleague, Clement Manyetelo, on 702, and it was so thoughtful, but also I realized there's not enough of this conversation happening, that in as much as we focus on breaking that chain with the young people, there are adults that don't even know that there is a trauma that they need to be dealing with. I mean, let's not even talk about apartheid and what mass trauma that caused that we haven't even started to deal with.
So, Marcel, I mean, the reason why I had left, I've been working in the field of violence prevention for about 20 years. And in 2021, I left to start the Center for Mental Wellness and Leadership, because there was so much that we are learning now with digitalization around how our brain works. Like a simple thing, myself, that we are learning that when we are traumatized, our capacity to use our cerebral cortex, which is that part of us that helps us to reason, that helps us to function, that helps us to have empathy with other people, gets deactivated. We end up operating from what we call the limbic system, and whose the only thing that the limbic system can do is to fight, to freeze, or to flight. So when you have a society that is led from the limbic system, you are in crisis. You can recruit the most talented people with great CV and try to put them in influential position, but if they are not healed, they will lead the society from the limbic system. And the reason I started this organization is because I was saying that the success and the downfall of South Africa is not going to be because there's no political will. It's not going to be because we are all trash or we are people that want to deliberately hurt each other, but it's because we are so asleep to the depth of trauma, the multi-level of trauma that we're going through, and how it shows up in the way that we are in the workplace, in our relationship, in how we deal with problems and how we understand them. So I agree with you, Marcel. There's a whole drive, and that's my passion. And that's why in the workshop we want to have on Saturday, I am calling in investors and funders. The people, there's so many people in our country that are trying to make a difference in South Africa, but they are not appreciating that if you want to make a difference in South Africa, you are making a difference in a traumatized society with multi-levels of personal, collective, historical trauma. So you cannot just say, I'll invest in education and not invest in the wellness of the leaders, the teachers and the scholars, or you're going to invest in the renewable energy, or you're going to change the electricity without saying, but what is the social and the human capital of the people that are in these institutions, and therefore their capacity to implement the strategies that we have.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Important conversation there, and hopefully we'll talk some more about it. Nomfundo Mogapi, thank you so much for your time and your insight. She is the CEO of the Center for Mental Wellness and Leadership. You heard her mention their workshop they're having next weekend. You can go find Nomfundo Mogapi on social media for more information.